They say I'll never be free. I'll die in there.
Clifford Hampton, who has been in this prison 61 years, right? Longer than I have been alive.
In this video, we'll explore the fascinating stories of individuals who received long sentences and luckily got out.
It was like me reliving my hearing those words that you're free.
As we explore their tales, you'll discover cases where further investigation eventually revealed the truth, and individuals who already spent more than 90% of their entire lives in prison.
I think it's a lifetime job.
From convicts who never committed a crime but were given a life sentence without parole, to others with harrowing stories.
I was innocent. I knew that I was not in prison for murder.
Here are 20 convicts that received long sentences and got out. Number 20, Joe Lagan. Decades ago in the United States, the notion of parole was an unattainable dream for many incarcerated individuals. Among them, Joe Lagan stands as a living testament to one of the most prolonged sentences as a juvenile lifer in the nation's history. At the age of 83, Joe Lagan's release marked the end of a nearly 7-decade-long odyssey behind bars, a journey that began when he was just 15 years old. His life story serves as a poignant example of the unforgiving nature of a system that offered no hope for rehabilitation. The year was 1953, when Lagan and 4 other teenagers embarked on an alcohol-fueled spree of robberies and stabbings in the streets of Philadelphia, a nightmarish series of events that claimed the lives of 2 individuals. The teenagers were tried together. They pleaded guilty and were convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of ever getting out. While in jail, Lagan consistently maintained his innocence, and with this, his case drew significant attention over the years, with many advocates and legal experts questioning the fairness of his conviction and the length of his imprisonment. After years of legal battles and a significant effort by his legal team, in February 2021, at the age of 83, Joe Lagan was finally released from prison. When he got to the street for the first time after several years of incarceration, it all seemed to him as if he was in a new world. He began to spot cars he never saw in his previous era, and some other things he had never believed existed. Number 19, Eddie Collins. There was an inmate whose life reads like a gripping novel, filled with twists, heartaches, and an ultimate triumph of justice. That's Eddie Collins. His ill-fated destiny began in the sweltering summer of 1973, when he got caught up in a drug deal in Tucson with his brother Johnny. Little did they know that this day would change their lives forever. A dispute erupted, and in a tragic turn of events, a man named Terry Young lost his life. Here's the thing. Eddie had no inkling that his brother was carrying a gun, and neither of them had any intention of causing harm. Johnny, the one who pulled the trigger, took a plea deal, serving a decade behind bars. Eddie, however, opted for a different path, choosing a jury trial that resulted in a first-degree murder conviction and a life sentence. But the story doesn't end there. Eddie's lawyers believed that the punishment didn't fit his role in the crime, and they fought tirelessly for his release. After enduring 44 grueling years of prison life, Eddie Collins finally walked out a free man. Eddie Collins's story reminds us that sometimes justice may be delayed, but with unwavering determination, it can eventually prevail. Number 18, Harvey Stewart. This story is nothing short of man's wild ride through a lifetime of challenges. Harvey Stewart's journey into the Texas prison system began in the spring of 1951, when he got caught for a junkyard heist in Houston. That heist landed him a 10-year sentence. After serving 6 years, he was paroled, but his life took a dark turn in 1958 when he was convicted of murder in Beaumont, earning him a life sentence. During his time in prison, Stewart wasn't one to just sit still. He made not 1, not 2, but at least 3 daring attempts to escape. Can you believe it? He'd twist the bars off a prison window and crawl to freedom. And he actually managed to break out for a few days, although he was eventually recaptured and brought back behind bars. As a result, he ended up with an extra 2 decades added to his sentence. Stewart's life was marked by a series of troubling incidents, including robbing brothels in his younger days. When it came to the murder charge, he claimed self-defense, and he went to great lengths to keep evidence hidden from investigators. While behind bars, he didn't have a single visitor for over a decade, and it's not because he had no family, but because he outlived most of them. Finally, in 2011, at the age of 85, he was released on parole due to his failing health and advanced age, after spending over 60 years in the Texas prison system. Number 17, Paul Geidel. Born and raised in a small New York town, Paul Geidel grew up in a tight-knit community with his father working as a bartender. But in 1980, his life took an unexpected turn. It was a serene evening, the sun dipping below the horizon when the unexpected happened. Paul, only 17 years old at the time, found himself tangled in a series of events that led to his arrest for a murder he had no part in. The police showed up at his doorstep, and that moment changed the course of his life forever. Paul's journey through the prison system was no less eventful. He started his sentence at Sing Sing Prison. Despite good behavior that could have led to parole, doctors deemed him legally insane in 1926, and he was transferred to Dannemora State Hospital for the criminal insane, where he remained until 1972. Later, he moved to the Fishkill Correctional Facility, where he resided in a unit more like a dormitory than a traditional prison. Over time, Geidel formed bonds with prison officials, who occasionally took him out for special outings, like baseball games. In August 1974, he was granted parole. But here's the surprising part. At the age of 80, after living behind bars for 63 years, his entire adult life and with no family left, he felt that he wouldn't survive on the outside. So he chose to stay in prison for another 6 years. On May 7, 1980, Paul Geidel walked out of Fishkill, setting a record for the longest prison sentence in American history. With a smile, he quietly asked reporters, "No publicity, please." He is believed to have spent the rest of his days in a Dutchess County nursing home. Thus ended the story a man whose life was marked by a profound and poignant journey through the justice system. Number 16, Otis Johnson. On May 5, 1975, at around 12:35 noon, Detective Moran arrested Otis on the corner of a street near Mount Morris Park West. It all started with suspicions of Otis firing a gun. Later, Detective Moran claimed to find illegal drugs in Otis's pocket. At the time, Otis was dressed in his martial arts outfit and a tan jacket, but the twists didn't end there. The very next day, at 11:58 in the morning, an anonymous person called 911 reporting a man in a hallway, armed and selling drugs. The caller person described the suspect as a man in a beige coat. Moments later, officers Morgan and Aarons responded to the call and tried to arrest the person on the building's stoop. As things took a dangerous turn, shots were fired in the area. When the officers were distracted, an unknown person used the opportunity to shoot one of the officers before making a swift escape. What's startling is that this incident wasn't reported until after Otis was handcuffed inside Detective Moran's vehicle. Subsequently, Otis was taken to the 28th Precinct, where more narcotics were allegedly found in his pockets. In the end, Otis was sentenced to 25 years to life for the attempted murder of a police officer and possession of drugs, a crime he never admitted to and didn't commit. He ended up serving 40 years under a different name, James Williams. Otis didn't allow this to bring him down. During his 4 decades in prison, he achieved remarkable feats. He earned 2 college degrees, attended numerous self-help seminars, and became a source of support for fellow inmates. After a month of parole, he was freed. Number 15, Reuben Hurricane Carter. In the mid-1960s, Reuben Carter was a promising middleweight boxer who hailed from New Jersey. In his prime, he was living the dream. But in 1966, everything changed when he was accused and later convicted of a triple murder that happened in a Paterson, New Jersey bar. Here's the twist. Reuben and his co-defendant, John Artis, were found guilty in 1967, and they were sentenced to life in prison. Now, you might wonder, what makes this story so intriguing? Well, it's the intense controversy surrounding the case, fueled by allegations of racism. Reuben and John were African American while the victims were white. And this added a complex layer to the case. Years of legal battles followed, and then something incredible happened. In the 1976, a federal judge declared that Reuben and John hadn't received a fair trial and their convictions were tossed out. They were temporarily free. But the legal roller coaster wasn't over. They were retried in 1976 and reconvicted, yet in 1985, Reuben was released on bail. Finally, in 1988, more than 2 decades after the initial conviction, the charges against Reuben "Hurricane" Carter were dropped, and he walked out of prison a free man. Number 14. Johnson Van Dyck. In 1900, Johnson and his family departed their residence in Shelby County, Kentucky, and settled in Kokomo, Indiana. 7 years later, Johnson's life took a dramatic and unfortunate turn. He found himself entangled in a grave incident that resulted in a murder conviction. The incident occurred when Johnson and James Brown, a guy he met, were playing a game of 5-card stud poker in a local saloon. However, as the evening unfolded, a dispute erupted and escalated into a heated brawl. Regrettably, in the heat of the moment, Johnson took an action he never intended. He stabbed James Brown. This led to his arrest, of which Johnson pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in order to escape the electric chair punishment. Due to his confession, he was then convicted of second-degree murder in 1908. Johnson lived his life at Indiana State Penitentiary in Michigan City. So, after he served 66 years in the penitentiary and in a ward for the insane, Johnson was then released in December 1974. Number 13. Francis Clifford Smith. Early in the morning on July 23, 1949, 2 men broke into the Indian Harbor Yacht Club in Greenwich, Connecticut, a stately white building. The pair shot a night watchman named Grover Hart. He was 68, with a wife and an adult daughter. Police determined that the motive for the break-in was robbery. Stuffs that were stolen include an unspecified amount of jewelry, 6 neckties with the club's insignia, some tie clips, and the club manager's hat. It doesn't seem like what anyone should go to jail for, but the thing is, Hart didn't survive the gunshot. However, before his last breath, he told police that one of the men was small and wore a bandana over his face. This description perfectly fit Francis Clifford Smith's appearance, and he was immediately arrested. Smith didn't act alone. He was with another prolific Connecticut criminal named George Loudon. Loudon took a plea deal, implicating Smith, and was convicted of murder in the second degree. During the time of Loudon's conviction, Smith went into hiding. When he was found, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by electrocution. The state of Connecticut was prepared to kill Smith, not once but 8 times. By the 8th and final time, his head was shaved for the electric chair. But a miracle happened. At 3 p.m. the next day, the Board of Pardons met to consider a last plea for clemency. With a 2-week escape in 1967 and a brief parole in 1975, Smith served a total of 70 years in prison. But if we count his previous incarcerations, plus the juvenile detention center he went to as an adolescent, he had spent close to 85 years in the justice system. After a retrial and a witness confession, Smith got a new life in 2021. Number 12. Wilbert Rau. The life of 19-year-old Wilbert Rau took a dramatic turn when he got involved in a serious crime in 1961. It was a bank robbery, and someone was hurt. He was sentenced to death for killing a woman during the bungled bank robbery, which occurred in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Rau was then sent to Angola State Penitentiary, where he underwent a profound transformation. After his sentence was commuted to life, he became editor of the prison magazine, The Angolite, turning it into a respected publication. The magazine exposed abuses by guards and inmates alike, and Wilbert was really good at this. As a result, Rau was nominated for 7 national magazine awards. This newfound skill opened doors to a different future. In 1979, the U.S. Supreme Court reviewed his case and decided that his original trial wasn't fair. They changed his sentence from life in prison to a chance at parole. It was a second shot at life, and Wilbert seized it. Once released, he didn't let his past define him. Wilbert Rau went on to become a renowned journalist, earning awards for his exceptional work. His journey from a troubled past to a celebrated journalist is a powerful reminder that people can change and that the legal system can sometimes correct its own errors. So there you have it. The story of Wilbert Rau, a man who turned his life around after a lengthy prison stay, showing us the incredible potential for transformation and second chances. Number 11, Craig Richard Coley. This next dude's story is a real-life nightmare. Craig Richard Coley's life took a harsh turn on Veterans Day in 1978. He was just 31 years old, a decorated Navy veteran with multiple deployments to Vietnam. He was also the son of a Los Angeles police officer. But on that day, he was accused of a double murder he didn't commit and given a life sentence without any chance of parole. The twist in this story is that 9 years into Craig's unjust sentence, a detective named Mike Bender started to believe that something was terribly wrong. He was convinced that Craig was innocent and had been wrongfully imprisoned. Imagine Mike's dedication, believing in someone's innocence for 30 long years and fighting for justice. Finally, in 2017, Craig's nightmare ended. New evidence came to light, proving he never committed those crimes. He walked out of prison a free man after spending an agonizing 39 years locked up for something he didn't do. Craig's parents passed away while he was in prison. Without them, Craig had nowhere to return to. Despite the injustices against him, Craig has embraced kindness, forgiveness, and faith. Craig received $21 million compensation from a federal lawsuit. He also got over $20,000 raised through GoFundMe to help Craig get back on his feet. Number 10, Ricky Jackson. You're about to witness a harrowing tale of injustice. In 1975, at the young age of 18, he was wrongly convicted of murder in Ohio. It was a case built on shaky ground, and it led to an astonishing 39 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. Imagine spending nearly 4 decades in prison for something you didn't do. Ricky's case is a glaring example of the flaws in our legal system. However, in 2011, a breakthrough happened. A key witness came forward and recanted their testimony, admitting they had lied under pressure. This revelation set the stage for a legal battle that ultimately resulted in Ricky's release in 2014. After enduring almost 40 years of wrongful imprisonment, Ricky Jackson finally experienced freedom. Since then, he's dedicated himself to advocating for criminal justice reform, using his story to shed light on the problems within the system. His story is not just about the injustice he suffered, it's about the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. Number 9, William Heirens. Let's dive into the terrifying tale of William Heirens, the infamous lipstick killer. Heirens was a young man born in 1928 who made headlines in Chicago during the 1940s. In that era, the city was gripped by fear due to a series of gruesome murders. Heirens found himself at the center of it all. 3 murders marked by cryptic messages written in lipstick at the crime scenes sent shockwaves through the community. Heirens was arrested and convicted for these crimes, receiving 3 consecutive life terms in prison. What makes his story so frightening was his unwavering claim of innocence. His case made a record as one of the earliest instances of a serial killer in American history. As time went on, Heirens spent decades behind bars while striving to clear his name. The mystery surrounding his guilt or innocence cast a shadow over the justice system. Did he really commit these crimes, or was he pressured into a false confession? As at 2012, Heirens had spent 66 years of his life in detention. Heirens became a free man in early 2012, but he couldn't stay healthy for long to enjoy his freedom. On February 26, 2012, Heirens died from diabetes. Number 8, Richard Honic. Richard was an ordinary guy who lived in Illinois and worked as a bookkeeper, but in 1899 his life took a sharp turn. One day, he got into a heated argument with a police officer and things got out of control. He ended up shooting the officer. Now, for that act, he was sentenced to 54 years in prison. That's a really long time, right? But here's the kicker. He didn't get out until 1963, a whopping 64 years later. That's a mind-boggling stretch behind bars. Serving such a long jail term in prison, despite the fact that the policeman who was shot survived, showed the dark side of how the justice system was back in the day. Eventually, in 1963, The court decided that it was time to let Richard go, and he was released on parole. His story became a symbol of how our views on crime and punishment have changed over the years. It's a reminder of how far we've come in terms of thinking about rehabilitation and fairness in our justice system. Number 7. Clifford Hampton. Meet Clifford Hampton, who, back in 1958, committed a horrific act. He took the life of 18-year-old Bertha Ann Gibson because she refused his advances. The details are chilling. He stabbed her a staggering 28 times. Hampton, just 17 at the time, was sentenced to life in Angola prison, but life behind bars didn't quell the violence within him. 3 years later, he ended the life of a fellow inmate named Kami Time, all because of what he believed were lies being spread about him. And that's where his troubles began to snowball. He faced a sex offense conviction, was found with shanks fitted with nails and needles, and adamantly refused to take a sex offender treatment class. The twist in this story comes when his initial murder charge for Gibson's death was reduced to manslaughter. The victim's family vehemently opposed this change. Fast forward to early 2019, Hampton was 78 years old. At that age, he had spent a jaw-dropping 61 years in prison. But in the end, thanks to community support in early 2019, at the age of 78, the Louisiana Board of Pardons and Parole released Clifford Hampton from prison for good. Number 6. Anthony Maza. Robert Anderson was a master of deception, and his attitude led to the situation that landed his friend Anthony Maza in detention. Let's make this better. You see, Anderson had a dark side. He committed crimes that are hard to fathom, including the murder of a man named Peter Armada, who he killed so he could rob him of his valuables. But the thing is, when the heat from the police investigation turned up, he played innocent. He denied any involvement in these horrific deeds and instead pointed the finger at Anthony Maza. With the police investigation focusing on Anderson's testimony, they concluded that Maza was to be blamed. On that note, Maza was arrested and charged with the murder of Peter Armada, not to mention the fact that Maza had used the poor man's credit card for good measure. It's a classic tale of a criminal mastermind who managed to outwit the law, at least for a while. Maza paid a steep price for crimes he didn't commit, locked away for over 3 decades. But in 2011, the truth finally came to light, new evidence resurfaced, and the courtroom drama that followed ended with Maza's name cleared and his freedom restored. This is a story of justice delayed but not denied. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. Imagine this captivating story of a woman's incredible journey through time and incarceration. The first picture on the left side takes us back to 1967, where we see a young girl, just 16 or 17 years old, her life ahead of her. In the second image, we're confronted with an entirely different sight, an old woman, now in her late 80s, who's barely recognizable. Here's the astonishing twist. These two pictures depict the same person, a woman who was sentenced to life in prison at a tender age. Her life unfolded within the confines of the prison walls, each day marked by the passing of time and the challenges of incarceration. Now over to you. Can you recognize the woman in the photo? Or better still, what do you think her crimes were for her to be jailed? Kindly drop your responses in the comment section below. Number 5. Henry Montgomery. Back in 1963, when Henry was barely 17, he found himself accused of shooting a white East Baton Rouge sheriff's deputy. The aftermath of the shooting saw over 60 men arrested, and Henry's life took a drastic turn. He was tried and convicted for murder and, shockingly, received an automatic death penalty. But that's not the end. In 1966, the Louisiana Supreme Court saw the stormy atmosphere around the trial and declared it unfair. They overturned his conviction and sentence. Henry faced a second trial in 1969, which ended with a mandatory life without parole sentence. As a teenager entering the notorious and brutal Angola prison, life was far from easy. Yet against all odds and with no hope of release, he transformed himself. He became a coach for a boxing team, worked in the prison's silkscreen department, and emerged as a positive role model and mentor for his fellow inmates. However, Henry didn't lose hope of regaining his freedom. Years went by, and his appeals were denied time and again, but he remained persistent. And in 2021, Henry regained his freedom. Number 4. Victor Hassen. Victor Hassen's life was like a wild ride at a theme park, full of ups and downs with a loop-the-loop or two. Back in 1981, the roller coaster of his life took a dark turn when he got in trouble with the law. He was arrested, and his future became uncertain. The legal system decided his fate in 1983, and he was given a hefty sentence. For the next 20 years, his world was confined to prison walls, and life was anything but a walk in the park. However, within those prison walls, something remarkable happened. Victor decided to take his life into his own hands. He became a student, immersing himself in books and knowledge. In 2003, after a lot of hard work, he earned a college degree, showing that education can bloom even in the most unlikely places. Then, in 2008, the gates opened, and Victor walked out a free man. He carried the wisdom he gained during his roller coaster years with him, vowing to inspire others. Number 3. Howard Christensen. At just 17 years of age, Howard Christensen got into some deep trouble. He and his buddy were sentenced to life in the slammer for the death of Ada Carey in South Dakota. That's as bad as it gets, right? Well, it wasn't bad enough for the law back then. See, they thought life in prison for Christensen without parole was too soft a punishment. So they reinstated the death penalty 2 years later. Now the twist. Howard Christensen ended up doing a marathon stretch of nearly 6 decades. Yes, you heard that right. 58 years in the Louisiana State Penitentiary. He practically had a lifetime subscription to that place. He even became famous in the prison's newspaper, The Angleite, as the grand champion of being locked up. At 75, they finally said, "Okay, Christensen, you've had your time," and granted him parole in 1995. He probably did a little happy dance when he got out. But life on the outside, after spending most of it on the inside? Tough stuff. 3 years later, he passed away at home. Howard's tale is like a roller coaster, showing us the real deal about life in the big house and what happens when you finally taste freedom. Number 2. Charles Edrit Ford. So, there's this guy, Charles Edrit Ford. Back in 1952, he was handed a life sentence for a murder he didn't commit. Seriously, he wasn't even near the crime scene. Now, fast forward to 1975. This time, Charles was out on a break from prison, and boom, he was hit with a second-degree assault charge. The lady who got attacked said she saw a guy next to a red car, and he gave her a good scare. To make it more interesting, the red car was rented under Charles's name. But he keeps saying, "Nope, wasn't me, folks." Here's where it gets even wilder. During the trial, the lady who was attacked described the suspect, but didn't really point the finger at Charles. She's like, "Yeah, he kinda looks like the guy." And guess what? The judge bought it, and the jury goes, "Yep, sounds about right." So Charles Ford gets slapped with a 64-year sentence. Another investigator took over the case, and it was discovered that Ford was imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. After a few weeks, Ford became a free man again. Number 1. Frank Freshwaters. In 1959, Frank Freshwaters was convicted and sentenced to prison for a tragic crime. His sentence began back in 1959 when he was found guilty of manslaughter connected to a fatal car accident. Freshwaters served a part of his sentence, but then managed to escape from prison the same year. For nearly 56 years, he remained on the run, living under assumed names and identities. It was an extensive and elusive escape. In 2015, at the age of 79, Frank Freshwaters was finally apprehended and returned to prison. He had spent over half a century evading the law. The story took an unexpected twist when his case gained attention and support from advocates arguing that his sentence was unduly long, considering the nature of his crime. After serving some time back in prison in 2016, he was granted parole. Freshwaters had finally regained his freedom after many years behind bars, marking a remarkable chapter in his life's journey. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.